Happy Wednesday. Good morning. I have such a special guest. You guys are going to really do backflips when you meet Sylvia. So, Sylvia Baffour is here today, and I'm going to bring her in a minute, but this is amazing. So, this woman is an expert in emotional intelligence and the author of I Dare You to Care. But what I just learned prior to this show is that she had been mentored by the great Maya Angelou. And it's no surprise that she ended up doing what she's doing. And I want to make sure that you all give her a huge, huge welcome. Welcome, Sylvia. I think that your microphone is off. Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Welcome, Sylvia. So glad that you are here. And I just am going to share a little bit of this backstory because it's ridiculous and it really bodes well for anybody who is in transition. So I'm actually going to flip it over to you. Remind me and share with everyone else how it is that you met Maya and how it is that she became Auntie Maya and your mentor, because that snippet of information is priceless.
Well, thank you, Lauren, for having me, and greetings to everyone who's chiming in. So I'm going to try my best to make it quick because I know that there's a lot that you probably want to ask. So I met Dr. Maya Angelou when I was waiting tables at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. about 20 years ago, maybe 21 years ago. And long story short, after about 10 minutes of greeting her and just saying hi, I literally thought she was going to say hello like every other celebrity who came and then have me going on my merry way back to my tables. And she wanted to know more about me and what I was about in life. And so long story short, she ends up inviting me to Thanksgiving at her home in Winston-Salem that particular year. And yeah, sort of the mentorship and guidance began. And I was telling you, Lauren, that to this day, even though she's been gone now for a few years, I still have a hard time wondering and understanding why me, what did she see that sort of made her want to extend so much grace and kindness to me and give me so much time through the 13 years that I got a chance to spend with her, whether it was at her home in Harlem or her home in Winston-Salem. So yeah, and it turns out after a year of meeting her, I learned that she had become godmother of my aunt's twins that she had adopted in England. And my father had 19 brothers and sisters, so I wasn't very close to all of his siblings, and I didn't know that. This was a piece of information I didn't know. And they called her Auntie Maya, and so did my aunt, right? And so after a few years of going to Thanksgivings, one day she was sitting around her dinner table eating some Bojangles chicken with Cicely Tyson, and I'm washing dishes in her sink thinking, first of all, what am I doing here, right? And then I got the courage to go up to her and ask her if she wouldn't mind if I called her Auntie Maya, because Dr. Angelou felt so formal, after the years of knowing her a little bit more. And she was like, oh, of course, Miss Baffour. And then, so that's how the story continued,
So aside from this being an incredible story about your experience, how this translates for anybody who is in career transition or even in a job that they absolutely love, please get out in the world, take a risk, which is part of what we're going to be talking about today, the risky business of emotional intelligence. Take a risk. Reach out to somebody. You don't know where that's going to lead or the impact. Julie Brown, the author of This Shit Works, always talks about how the people you meet will change your life. And clearly that is exactly what happened for you. And I know that you are also that person for so many. And so what we're going to move over to today is the topic of this blast, which is emotional intelligence. And what I'm going to ask you is specifically what are the biggest risks of emotional intelligence as it relates to those who are in their job search, working in organizations that they're not really loving right now, or with managers who aren't necessarily walking the talk and demonstrating a level of empathy, emotional intelligence, etc.
Yeah, well, Lauren, I think that it's interesting because people probably don't think of emotional intelligence as risky business, right?
Right.
And I don't think I did until I wrote the article, almost a decade ago now. But to me, it's this idea that, look, if I always say that emotional intelligence is not a skill set you're going to need when your life is perfect and everything is lined up in all your ducks are lined up in a row, right? Maybe it's what you need most in those challenging and inconvenient moments of your life, right? So the risky business aspect of it to me is when it comes to self-awareness and emotional self-management, right, which are sort of core foundational principles of emotional intelligence. It's risky to go on a journey of self-awareness, because it can be ego bruising. You're going to discover things about yourself, right? You're going to have blind spots illuminated to you by others through external self-awareness, right? Internal is what we give ourselves. External self-awareness is the feedback we're getting from others. So I think it may feel risky because you're putting your ego on the line, right? You may discover things about yourself in a journey of brutal honesty that might be painful to realize. But the reality is that it's helping you become the best candidate, right? And if you think about leaders that you're working with who are emotionally unintelligent, they haven't yet risked the journey of self-discovery, sort of self-awareness, and figuring out, how am I moving through this world? And am I doing so in a way that is attracting people to me or repelling others?
Oh, this is such a great distinction, right? Are
Right.
you a catalyst of attraction,
Yeah.
or are you somehow giving off the vibe that you are not necessarily somebody that others want to engage with?
Yeah, I mean, I last night I was just thinking about EI more. I'm always thinking about emotional intelligence, and I thought very succinctly, do people crave your presence or your absence? I mean, that's just how I think about it, and emotional intelligence is not a fun journey, because having to introspect, having to step in the shoes of somebody else you don't agree with, and still show respect while you disagree. These are things that aren't easy to do. It feels risky because the comfort zone is just to be around people who think like us and agree with us and flow in the same direction, right? But empathy isn't meant for people who agree with us and are flowing on the same wavelength. It's not. It's very easy to empathize with those people. The hard work is in doing it for people you don't understand, or if it's a difficult boss. It's interesting because sometimes we forget that everyone is human, right? And you can have a boss who's not so kind and thoughtful, and yet if you are able to meet them on a different level, different plane, sometimes you inspire better behavior in other human beings around you.
Right. And what you said is it's not like a flip of a switch, right?
Right.
It really isn't. So it's risky because why? Why is it like so risky?
I mean, well, I'll tell you in a bit of a flip way that people don't always think about. If you are led by a narcissistic person, or you're in an interview with somebody who clearly seems like they're narcissist, the risky part sometimes is people who don't mean well, leaders who are ill-intended, will use emotional intelligence, but simply for manipulation. That's it, right?
Right.
Okay, because empathy there's three levels of empathy. The first one is cognitive, that just says I see where you're coming from, I see you. And so people who are ill-meaning, whether it's someone who's even sitting in an interview with you that you can kind of tell they're just not bent on opening up and hearing your experiences and how you can make a difference in their organization, they may come across as cognitively empathizing with you, but it's simply so they can manipulate and use that position, that new knowledge they have of where you stand, against you.
And so what do you do in those situations? I mean, how do you keep yourself? Because so much of what's happening here, and what I really want to make sure, it says that there's no picture and a black screen. Oh, brother, we don't have that, but no picture and a black screen. This is not fun, having issues. Unfortunately, we're going to have to continue because I can see you, but I don't have any other errors, but it is saying having issues.
Is
So
everyone seeing a black screen or just some people?
I think I'm getting a lot of comments saying that there's glitches with the live, so that they'll watch the recording. It gets into a loop. So there must be some series of challenges that are happening here. And so our apologies. Sorry, everybody. Unfortunately, I'm not going to stop the live and come back. So we're
Hopefully
going
the
to
audio
continue.
is okay for people, which is
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so.
okay.
Oh, that's a bummer, right?
Yeah.
So maybe do a refresh, everybody. Just try it. I don't know what else to say. But what I did want to pick back up on is this idea of how you are able to get to the place of emotional intelligence and use your emotions to your advantage rather than let them take advantage of you.
Mm.
So how do we do that? Because there's a lot of kind of like silent grenades that go off in our work life, and it's not that easy to wrangle ourselves when we feel like we're being, bombed.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most essential first steps of using our emotions to work for us and not against us comes in the form of becoming very present with the conversations you're having with yourself in those challenging and difficult moments. Because I often say that when things are not going right for us, so we're in facing a challenge or a difficulty, the first thing that leaves us out of the window, out of the door, just out of the room is our self-talk. We lose control over the conversations we're having with ourselves in those moments. And that's what I call minding your monologue. Just sometimes grabbing a hold of yourself to say, am I minding my monologue? You're having these potentially catastrophic conversations with yourself about what is happening around you. One of the things I know Maya Angelou is very famous for saying is that, look, in life, we're not always going to be able to control what happens to us, right? But we can choose not to be reduced by it. And I think that's so powerful. So, using your emotions to work for you means you're not helplessly walking through life, reacting to emotional triggers and always feeling like a damsel in distress, a helpless being. And one of the things I talk about is adopting shifting phrases. It's what I call the idea of thinking about what triggers you emotionally and getting present to how you typically react when you're triggered. Maybe you're triggered by what feels like a condescending conversation. So many of us people say, Sylvia, when I'm triggered, I can't control it. I just have to let it pass, right? And yes, you can control it. And you can control it by first getting very present with this conversation you're having with yourself, and then adopt what I call a shifting phrase, which is asking yourself a question that simply cools the temperature for you to allow you to bring your best self to the next moment, right? So, for instance, Lauren, if you trigger me because I feel like we had a disrespectful conversation, instead of me saying, "Oh no, I can't believe bleep bleep talk to me that way," I could say, "Is it possible she didn't mean to offend me?" Right? And I'm saying this to myself, and it just gives me the cooling few seconds to then think about a more level-headed reaction. Because when you use a shifting phrase like, could it be that they didn't deliberately exclude me from the meeting, right? It just opens up the space for curiosity. So you're assuming positive intent until you know better, right? And I tease in my presentations, I use Will Smith, unfortunately, as an example now, because at the end of doing an exercise with my audience about shifting phrases so they can see how it works in real time, I ask them at the end, I say, raise your hand if you think Will Smith could have benefited from a shifting phrase that evening. So that no matter what happened in terms of whether Jada looked at him a certain way or whatever triggered him, if he had stopped in that moment and said, is it possible Chris didn't mean to offend my wife? I guarantee he wouldn't have gotten up and walked 11 steps to the stage to slap Chris Rock. It's incongruent of a reaction when you ask yourself shifting phrases to then bring out the worst nature within you. It doesn't happen because it opens up space to say, it's possible I'm wrong. It's possible that in this moment, I'm wrong with my assumption, which then allows you to be the best person in the next moment of your life.
Two things I love about that, everything that you just shared, minding your monologue, right? Like we hear about self-talk, but really like getting a clarity and perspective on what am I saying? Right. And then the second piece is that shifting phrase. Yes. Is this possible?
Right.
Could this be something blah, 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 right? To be able to provide the pause, right? Like people tell you to pause, but I'm always like, well, what do I do in the pause?
Exactly. It's not natural to pause when you're triggered. It's like, no, I want to
Right.
react, right?
If
But
I
if you,
couldn't pause, I would, but I can't because I'm so triggered. So
yeah,
it becomes kind of this catch 22. So
right.
now you have like an actual fill in for that, which is, some kind of shifting phrase.
Yes, exactly. Because that fills the gap between when we're triggered and when we choose to do something about it. It really does help us. Yeah. And I practice it myself in my personal and professional life all the time because I'm not perfect. We're all human. And Lauren, I always see the things that trigger you emotionally, the bad news. I feel like they're always going to be an emotional trigger for you. How you handle the trigger is what can evolve and improve over time, right? I'm always going
Completely.
to be triggered by not feeling trusted or disrespectful conversations. How I choose to handle myself in that space of being triggered is absolutely what can improve and allow us to be our best selves.
Wow. Okay. So I just need to do a little bit of a shout out. Thank you, Federico, for bearing with us. It seems like there's a glitch. Some people are saying it's better. It's the network. Claudia, thank you for testing in the back. And she says the audio is fine. Now somebody's seeing the full screen. Leslie, just when I thought the live was working well, it went back to loop. So she's going to catch it on the replay. And Andy York, always happy to see you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for knowing that it's live, which is why we are not getting triggered because we know what we're up against.
Yes.
So technology isn't always our friend.
Yeah.
What I want to jump to now is the kind of paradox that is happening in the world of work. And you have said specifically that leaders cannot thrive or succeed without building trust and creating healthy, productive relationships and excelling at positively influencing and inspiring those that they lead. But here's the thing. So many leaders are coming to this place, 70%, in fact, saying that they're struggling with their own well-being. So how are they going to be able to lead with inspiration and empathy and a level of caring when they are admittedly saying that they're so depleted?
Yeah, well, I think it's the obvious first step for leaders in that position is to acknowledge that, right? Acknowledge how they're feeling. This is a risky business of emotional intelligence. A leader being vulnerable enough to let the people that they're leading know about that, the burnout or exhaustion that they might be feeling, and finding ways to do it so you're not burdening the people you're leading, right, with
Yes.
your own inability to manage. But I think it's emotional intelligence is for all of us, right? So having the self-awareness to say, I can't sustain this pace I'm going at, because yes, it's the oxygen mask situation, right? Leaders having to put on the oxygen mask first, or else you're going to suffocate while you're trying to help those you're leading, and you create a very toxic environment because your inability to self-care is going to spill over and pollute the environment and the culture that you're leading, and so I think the people you're leading understand you're human. And if you can be vulnerable enough to share with them what you are dealing with, people will actually rise the occasion and help you out. I was coaching a scientist last year, and, she was very black and white in her thinking, very hated people. She worked in a lab by herself and then got promoted into a role where she had to lead people and work with surgeons and medical sales teams. And she was very much a black and white thinker, very inflexible. And so her boss, who hired me to help her bring the best out in herself, one day she's on a phone call with my client, and her boss sounds really overwhelmed and distracted. And so my client, I'll call her Susie, right, just to, and Susie says to her boss, you seem really overwhelmed and distracted at the moment. And her boss says, yes, I'm very overwhelmed, and I feel like I have the world on my shoulders. And then Susie says, Sylvia, pre-coaching, I would literally have said this. And you have to understand, this is the kind of personality she was. She said, before coaching, I would have said to her, I can understand that you're overwhelmed, but you have an overwhelming salary. So to much whom is given, much is expected. And I laughed like you did, Lauren, right? And I realized she was serious. That is the way she would have approached it. following a few months of working together, she said, so I said to my boss, I said, is there anything on your schedule right now that is sort of scientific, anything technical that I can maybe help you with? And she was so pleasantly surprised that here was somebody offering to offload some of that burden, even though she already had her own burdens, right? So
Right.
as leaders, it's important to be vulnerable, which is emotional, is the risky business, but do it in a way that's empowering, right? Where people say, my goodness, I want to try to help you, versus you're just pouring on people your inability to
Right.
manage your emotional state, right? But it's to say, right now I have all these pressures on me. I would love, I want to keep this as a fun working environment, and I would appreciate it if you can help me in that dance, right? How can we continue together to do this without burning out each other, in the tasks we have ahead of us,
Yes, and that does feel like a risk to actually be fallible, or to admit that you're experiencing burnout, or even what we were also talking about, imposter syndrome, right?
Yes.
And you talked about how even the great Maya Angelou, every time she wrote a new book, felt like people were going to find out about her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, managing your feelings of imposter syndrome are also under this huge umbrella of emotional intelligence. And what do you share with people when they come to you and they say, oh my God, I know I have this, right? I know I have this issue of emotional intelligence, of imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
and I am scared to death that people are going to find this out. And so I now spend my whole life maybe overcompensating for it.
Yeah.
And what can we all do? Because one of the things you said before this was it never goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lauren, like I said, to me, imposter syndrome is a sign of humility. We're constantly trying to better ourselves, get to the next level of ability and achievement. And so naturally, we're going to have these moments where we don't feel quite deserving of the space we find ourselves in. And so this idea that you just get rid of imposter syndrome and it goes away for life when you arrive at some station in your life is it's impossible. Because even with Maya Angelou, right, 11 best-selling books, and she said after every one, she would think, when am I going to be found out that I'm not as good a writer as people think? So the idea is leverage. I often talk about creating a brag book where you can chronicle your accomplishments, even in those little mundane moments, the compliment from your boss or the person told you did a really good job in your interview, right? Chronicling that in some sort of brag book, because someday when you are feeling like an imposter, you can reference this and remind yourself that you deserve to be exactly where you are. So
I
it's
call
it's
it the smile file.
the smile file. I like that. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I mean, it's just, but also understand, I feel like oftentimes as human beings, the problems we create within ourselves is when we're in a hurry to feel anything other than what we are feeling in that moment, right?
Mm.
And Lauren, it's the reason why I don't really like the term negative emotions, because all emotions that we're feeling are useful. It's information, it's telling us something. Now, what we do with how we feel in that moment is what can become good or bad, right? It's what can become positive or negative. And so there's nothing wrong with feeling like an imposter. There's nothing wrong with feeling dejected or overwhelmed at work, right? It's human. But what are we doing with how we feel? And that's where the work happens, right? That's the risky business of acknowledging that you're in a challenging space that doesn't feel comfortable. But like Dr. Susan David always said, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. You know,
Mm.
and so discomfort is a part of the human journey. It's not to be done away with. So much of who you are, all of you on this LinkedIn live, you're who you are because of the trials and tribulations you've also overcome, not just the great things that have happened in your life, right? So you're in that interview that doesn't go so well. The conversation you have leaving that space is the one you should care most about, right?
Mm.
It is the one because we have to be our best cheerleaders. There's so much out there in the world that's already beating us down. We cannot be contributing to that, self-rejecting, succumbing to the imposter syndrome voice in a way that just derails us and throws us off balance, right? So that's emotional intelligence. It's the hard work that is done in those uncomfortable and challenging spaces of our lives, not the rosy. No one needs EI when life is good.
when you're winning the lottery and life is great, right?
No one needs it. Yeah.
Exactly. But unfortunately, that's not life, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't roll that way.
No, it
I
doesn't.
want to bring this topic up because I know that it's timely. It's fourth quarter. There's a lot of restructurings, talks of layoffs, and other, important work-life issues that get really, really emotional. Am I going to get my bonus? And what's going to happen? My boss is leaving. And oftentimes we hear from the world of corporate, it's just business. We had to make this business decision. And so, unfortunately, this is really where it's easy to fall into the trap and wanting to actually give it to them, because oftentimes it comes, I sometimes call it whiplash. You never saw this coming.
Right.
And you have this kind of professional whiplash, and it really can send you for a spin. So how do we manage that and be honest and not burn a bridge? This is like, because I've been there.
Yeah. I mean, look, once again, it's so funny how so much comes down to the way we manage what we're doing with how we're feeling in moments of our lives, right? About 22 years ago, I was working for Arthur Andersen in DC. And long story short, after a year of working with them, they messed up. They screwed up my US visa and my work permit. And so I ended up with 15 days in the country legally before I had to evacuate from America and just uproot myself in my life. And while the partner, the partner at the time was sitting in his office telling me this bad news, meanwhile, I had given up my apartment. I had booked a ticket. I was going to be working in the Toronto, Canada office, and it just all became a mess. And I remembered something profound. I don't know how it entered my mind, but it was something I once heard the spiritual guru Gary Zukov say on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he said essentially, you must never use negative emotions. And you know how I feel about the word negative, but I'm just quoting him verbatim. You must never use negative emotions to make an important decision in your life and expect to have a positive outcome. So for me, when that entered my head, I thought, well, right now I'm feeling very negative for sure. I'm feeling dejected, betrayed, confused. But I knew that this was happening for a reason, even though I didn't understand why, right? And so sometimes I think we have to do that. When you're in a situation where there are layoffs happening and they tell you, oh, it's just business, right? You can't go back and say, but please give me my job back, right? Your role is now to manage in that moment how you bring your best self to the most difficult situation of your life. And you do it by not overreacting, cursing people out, leaving behind what I call a bitter emotional aftertaste. Because sometimes people are watching the way we behave in moments when we don't get what we want out of life, because they will come back to offer us something simply because of how we behaved in that moment. And I'm not saying everyone's challenging or testing us, but there's so many times when people ask me for things and I'm unable maybe to offer it, to say yes, right? And I'm looking out for how you react to that no. Because guess what? It turns around and it's like, you know what? You were so gracious, I had a designer on Fiverr the other day who I couldn't use. And he was so gracious in the rejection that I said, the next time I have a project, I'm coming straight to you. And he was so grateful that I noticed that he was professional and he wasn't reduced by the bad news, right? Like Maya Angelou says, right? We can't change what's happening around us, but we can choose not to be reduced by it and still be the best version of ourselves. That's all we can control, not what's being laid off and right. And in the stillness of not being reduced by the moment, sometimes there's so much wisdom that comes to us and life paths that we then choose to take that we wouldn't have taken if we were fighting, against the bad news, right? My life is a testament to that. Because of Arthur Andersen, thank goodness for them, I began my entrepreneurial journey, which would not have happened without that moment,
Absolutely. So this is really, really valuable because it's happening. It has happened to a lot of people, but you are now you're being observed.
Yes.
Right? This behavior is essentially your living example
Hmm.
of how you deal with situations that don't necessarily, turn out the way you want them to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want you to also, for everyone that was sticking around, you talk about the 5 EI habits to help your emotions work for you and not against you. And I would love it, as we are getting ready to wrap this up, to share your 5 so that we can all take them, because emotional intelligence is something I'm really going to need when I'm going home for Thanksgiving. I can promise you that. It's probably going to show up a couple times today when things are not going my way. And I
Hmm.
want to put these in my pocket and offer them to everyone else as well. So can you share your 5?
Sure, and I have them listed just so I wouldn't forget here. But the first one is get still, get still. Take time throughout your day to be present with your feelings and how you're behaving, right? We can't be moving through life in autopilot. Are you aware of how you're feeling and how you're talking to yourself, which is the second one, mind your monologue, right? So get still, mind your monologue, pay attention, pay close attention to the conversations you have with yourself, most especially in those inconvenient, uncomfortable, challenging moments of your life. It is a time to grab a hold of the monologue because it literally influences the next thing you do. Right. The third thing is assume positive intent. Right.
Mm.
Are you somebody, we all have judgments we've got to make as human beings, but can you embrace curiosity about your judgments instead of simply being attached to them? Thinking, hey, I wonder why Lauren is thinking this way about me. Right. Sorry if you're hearing an ambulance in the background. The fourth one is grow the gap, right? Lengthen the gap between impulse and action. As I talked about with those shifting phrases, can you grow the gap in the moments you're triggered, right? Before you do
Oh,
something.
that one's genius.
Yeah, so
So buy
important.
yourself some airtime.
Exactly, exactly. And then the last one is, ask yourself what I call more gateway questions. Questions that begin with the word what and why. In challenging situations in your life, stop asking, sorry, what and how. Don't ask why, which I call barricading questions. They barricade in your thinking. It's very hard to say, well, why did I get passed up for that promotion? I don't understand why you did. But a gateway question is, hey, how can I present my skills for greater impact, right? Or how can I boost my marketability? And you're going to focus on that. So gateway questions, how and what, versus the why is this happening to me, which are very barricading type of questions.
Yes. So these, I'm going to run these by one more time. Just so, number 1, get still, right?
Yes.
Present.
Yeah.
Number 2, mind your monologue, right? What self-talk track is running in your head?
Right.
Oh, what a gift. Assume positive intent rather than the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Grow the gap.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. Buy yourself a little bit of space to actually get present and think about all those things. And then ask yourself, this is powerful, gateway questions. How can I blah, blah, blah?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What can I, or what might I blah, blah, blah?
Right.
And so, those are, keep those in your pocket when somebody's pissing you off
Yeah.
or when you can feel yourself getting triggered.
Yeah. I mean, emotional intelligence is work, Lauren, but it's work worth doing. It is not easy, right? For all of us. And it's not about, oh, why do I always have to be the bigger person? It is just, how can I better manage internally what's impacting me externally that is often out of my control? All we can do is manage within first. So,
Absolutely. So tell us also why you wrote this book, who it's for. I dare you to care, and tell us what we can assume we will take away from that, from reading your book, because mine is actually coming today.
yeah. Well, Lauren, I wrote the book because I realize that to me, emotional intelligence is a lived experience, right? It's all about what are the tools you can take into the streets of your life every day, literally, to help you navigate your relationships in the best way possible. I didn't want it to be a book that read like a textbook. I've read lots of emotional intelligence books that get very lost in the science, the neuroscience, in the weeds, and I always found myself not finishing the books. And so I tried to create a book that is largely anecdotal, right? It's filled with the stories of everyday people either using or misusing emotional intelligence and sort of seeing the outcomes. And I think it was so. I say if you want a book, an emotional intelligence book that's going to make you feel like you've earned a PhD in EI, then my book isn't the one for you. But if you're looking for a book that just shows you on a very daily basis how you can take simple, practical tools into your life to help you be the best version of yourself, then that might be an option for you as well. You know, it's I dare you to care, to me is an invitation for all of us to care about the way we are moving through this world, right? It's not magic. It's not for us to be perfection. It is simply, can you be a little bit better today than you were yesterday? You know, and it's a dare I continue to invite people to care about. You know?
So thank you so much, Sylvia, for setting up a really good dare and inviting us all to care, to learn about our ability to manage our emotions and our emotional intelligence, not just for ourselves, but certainly for the other people that we may be leading and those around us. You are a complete gift. And I love how much you've shared about your personal story, being mentored by Dr. Angelo, and also the work that you've been doing, and not sugarcoating it, right? And
Yes.
really being clear and so practical. I see there's a message there from Lindsay saying, wow, this is really practical. So you put it into action.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much. Thank you for bearing with all the technology challenges. You guys are troopers, and I really, really appreciate you hanging out. So Sylvia, I will hang out for a few minutes, and
Sure.
everybody have a great Wednesday. It's been a
Thank
blast.
you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.